Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for spending a little time with us tonight. It's good to see everybody as we're here to discuss the EMBER program and wildfire mitigation and resiliency here in Berkeley. I'm really pleased to say that we've gotten more than 200 people who've already, I think we're coming up on 100 people who've joined us. We're creeping up on that number. And so certainly a lot of interest in this topic, and I really appreciate you spending the time. Just by word of a heads up, we are recording the webinar and we'll share the link next week with everyone who registered and even probably to everyone in District 6 so that if people want more information, they'll have a recording. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Brent Blackaby. I'm your council member here in District 6. I knew when I was running for election last fall that wildfire would probably be the biggest issue that I'd be working on here on your behalf in Berkeley. But given the devastation of the Los Angeles wildfires, the fact that they traveled all the way from the hills down to the water, and the wealth of lessons that we've learned in the wake of those fires, I'm even more committed to this work and to wildfire safety than before. I've been working in my team, Lori McWhorter and Hannah Wadaje in my office. We've been working every day with the fire chief, with our fellow council since the start of January. And the work just continues to pick up because we know how important it is. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion tonight, and I hope you find it informative. After presentation, we're going to take questions verbally, and we will just ask you to raise your hand by clicking the raise hand button here on Zoom. And then we'll call your name, you'll unmute yourself, and you'll be able to ask your question to our guest and myself. So very briefly, just as to get the audience participation going, and I'm going to take a look. Can we see a show of hands, hit the raise hand button to see how many of you know nothing or very little or just starting to learn about EMBER? If this is a new subject for you and something that you are kind of hearing about for the first time, because we just want to make sure that we guide the discussion appropriately. Okay, looks like about kind of probably 20% or so. It's new, 80% have some familiarity. That's great, thank you. You can put your hands down. That will just help Colin and me as we think about how to guide the discussion. I do hope that at the conclusion of this evening, you'll feel more informed and hopefully even energized about EMBER, about the promise of making Berkeley dramatically safer from a wildfire conflagration. Assistant Fire Chief Colin Arnold is with us tonight. He's our local resident expert on the Wildfire Urban Interface and the work that we're doing to prepare. He's going to talk about the EMBER proposal, what the city is asking us to do. And just to be clear, I totally understand this is a really big ask, right? I live on Grizzly Peak. I'm in this new proposed fire zone 4. The work that's being asked of all of us is work that I'm going to be doing as well. But I want you to know that we're also not alone in this work. And that's also, I think, an important message I hope we take away from tonight. There are lots of individuals and groups that are all up here. As a matter of fact, our mayor, Adina Ishii, asked the Berkeley Fire Safe Council just a few weeks ago if they would step up to do some Zone 0 vegetation work, which you're going to hear about more soon for low-income residents that are in these targeted areas. And they have accepted that request. I'm grateful that they're willing to step up here. We'll hear a little bit more about that. And Colin is going to be coordinating with them to make that happen. It's really, yes, we are being asked to do work, but it's not just homeowners that are doing their part to make Berkeley safer. Everyone is being asked to increase their responsibility and their actions, including our regional partners. And I wanted to take you through just a few of those before we go to Colin. So Hannah, if you could put those slides up, that'd be great. I've met with all of these partner agencies, and each has expressed their deep commitment to making Berkeley safer from wildfire with ongoing and proactive wildfire fire mitigation efforts. They want to keep buildings and their land thriving in Berkeley just as much as we all want our homes to be safe. So just to really quickly tick through the list, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Between February and April of this year, they've committed to us that they're going to be removing about 55 dead, dying, and other hazardous eucalyptus trees around their main entrance off Cyclotron Road. They are always constantly sort of thinning clustered groups of trees and removing highly flammable leaf litter, low-hanging branches, and shrubs. Their work is going to help keep the lab, UC Berkeley, and our neighbors and our neighborhoods safer from wildfire. The Regional Park District, last year, they treated over 1,200 acres to reduce hazardous fuels district-wide. So that partially includes Tilden Park, but it also includes work down closer to Oakland and up closer to Richmond. And this coming year, 2025, they've pledged to spend $9 million and potentially even more on hazardous fuel reduction in the Park District. They sustain a full-time firefighter crew, Fire Chief Aileen Tiley, and they are active in our East Bay Wildfire Coalition. They maintain their own force and their own specialized equipment. UC Berkeley, somebody that we talk about a lot and talk to a lot. I was just with the Vice Chancellor today talking about some of these issues. They're ramping up to establish their own Firewise community with some of the residential dormitories. They also are doing vegetation management and fuel reduction on their property. PG&E, again, we wish that everyone would continue to do more, but here's what they are doing, right? The most impactful thing that they do during fire season now and fire weather is proactively do the PSPS, the public safety power shutoff, to mitigate the risk of electrical lines lighting fires. They cut limbs and maintain the vegetation around power lines, especially high voltage power lines. And if you need some assistance, please call them to trim branches around lines in your neighborhood. On undergrounding, I wish we could underground every power line. That's not going to happen in the short term. We can't count on that happening in the immediate term. And we're going to ask them to restore the program to do more undergrounding. That said, we are undergrounding about 100 homes on the Grizzly Peak Summit area, and that's a project that Councilmember Wengraf helped to get done over the last few years. East Bay Wildfire Coalition of Governments. This is a group that Councilmember Wengraf founded within the last couple of years. It's a regional court consortium of elected officials representing cities, counties, and fire districts in Alameda and Contra Costa counties. I now sit on this body, as does my colleague Shoshana O'Keefe. They work together with the fire chiefs and regional advisors to develop policies to increase fire mitigation and resiliency in the hills. Our lobbyist in Sacramento that represents the city praised this organization for having the clout and power to influence legislation and bring in needed fire mitigation funding. And we'll be a lot as we coordinate our efforts and also ask the state for more funding. The Berkeley Fire Safe Council, we already talked about. They're organizing some volunteer teams to help with hazardous fuel reduction on private property. They also secured private grants from PG&E to help remove, and actually did the removal of more than 134 blue gum eucalyptus on more than 20 different private properties last year, and that work continues. They're an integral part of this effort. Next slide, Hannah. We have over a dozen Firewise communities in Berkeley, which are sort of neighborhoods that are self-organizing and making commitments around the defensible space and home hardening work that they're committing to. And interest continues to grow, including in my own neighborhood. These communities work to reduce the risk of destruction from wildfire, and they get an official designation from the National Fire Protection Association. They're so effective that home insurance companies often, though not always, often look favorable homes in neighborhoods included in a Firewise community. Next slide. I know many folks are concerned about our water supply, and so we've been coordinating with East Bay MUD and asking them to do more. They have already developed a plan and executed a plan where they have a water system with a series of pumps that can service one area, so water can be pulled in from different sources. And there's sort of fallbacks in the event that one pump is failing. They have backup pumps to sort of move water where it needs to go. They also have installed generators, diesel fuel generators at pumping stations, so that if there is a power outage due to PSPS, they can continue to run those pumps during high fire weather. They have 10 million gallons of water in storage during the fire season, so that water is available. We are continuing to push them on the reservoirs and the water tanks that also are near Fire Zone 4 to make sure those are full during fire weather. Last year, East Bay MUD checked every hydrant in the high fire hazard zone, and they will continue to do that on a regular basis to make sure that the hydrants are prepared. We know that no matter what, however, there will never be enough water to put out an urban conflagration. Nothing can stop, high-speed winds and a lot of fuel. Only we can stop that, but it does give our firefighters the resources they need to try and battle the blaze. It makes it even more incumbent on us for us to do our part to mitigate the structure-to-structure fire that could ignite. Next on EBMUD vegetation management, next slide, Hannah. They also do this routinely as part of their work. You'll see an example in this photo of the kind of work they do to do maintenance in their territory. 10,000 acres of grazing with the goats, mechanical treatments on 200 to 300 acres. They also work together with BFD and other partners on the Grizzly Peak Strategic Fuel Break and other fuel breaks in the area. Last thing I'll say, and then we'll get to Colin because that's the main event. I guess the bottom line is, look, could folks be doing more? Could our partners be doing more? Absolutely, right? That's part of my job. That's part of my job as your council member, is to make sure that everybody is doing the lifting that they should and asking for more. Like, nothing is, we're not going to take anything as the last answer. We can ask everybody to do a little bit more. And that's really my responsibility, is to advocate for you and to work with my colleagues to make that done. But then we have our own part to play too. And this really is a collective action solution to a problem that requires collective action. So with that, I'd like to introduce Colin Arnold to join us. He's the Assistant Fire Chief. He runs the Wildland Urban Interface Division, or the WUI division at the Berkeley Fire Department, and he's going to take us through the EMBER proposal. So Colin, take it away, and thanks for being here tonight.
Absolutely. I don't know how I feel about being called the main event, but happy to be here. Let me know if the presentation gets a little glitchy on my end. The service should be good where I'm sitting, but if you do have trouble hearing me, council member, or if you or one of your staff could just let me know and I can find a workaround. But I think we're good. So it sounds like about 20% of you had not heard of the EMBER proposal. So I want to spend just a couple minutes briefly going over that and then giving you an update with where we're at. As Councilmember Blackaby said, my name is Colin Arnold. I'm the interim assistant fire chief in charge of the Wildland Urban Interface for the Berkeley Fire Department. I've been with the department for about 16 years now. I've been in this role for about a year. Back in January, Councilmember Blackaby, along with a couple other council members, called us and said, after LA, and said, "Hey, what should we be doing that we're not currently doing?" And that was the beginning of EMBER. What EMBER is a three-part proposal, and the first one, which is where we'll spend most of our time tonight, because it's the part that most affects residents up here in the Berkeley Hills, is establishing an additional fire zone that we adopt zone 0 in. And so that would be an adoption of the vegetative code, or the vegetative section of the fire code, that brings that code into best practices with the science, evidence, experimentation, and post-incident analysis that's come out of a lot of these fires. And then there's a building code component for during remodels, renovations, permitted work, making sure that building construction is following best practices. And again, for residents that want to take on additional work or independently pursue stuff, we also want to make sure that there is an opportunity for us to support that financially whenever possible, so that the decision to take on additional work is not a financial one. And then the third part of EMBER is the Leave Early and Staffing campaign. For those of you that listened to the February 11th presentation at City Council, we spent a lot of time talking about the challenges of evacuating the hills in a timely manner. The evacuation time study is a component of us looking into how we can be more effective with when we evacuate, how we evacuate, and how many zones we trigger at a given time. But it is also revisiting the strategy that we have been following for the last 2 to 3 years now, that encourages folks to leave early during very specific weather events, because those weather events create fire conditions where fire moves faster than people can evacuate. So We will spend most of the time tonight talking about this first section of the fire code, because that again is where you all come in and where your effort will really make a big difference for the entire city. But if you have questions about those other components, by all means, at the end, please ask. Before I go any further, if you haven't been over to Wildcat Canyon Road, we've got a crew down there starting the Grizzly Peak project. They've done most of Wildcat Canyon Road. You'll see a significant difference in the amount of vegetative fuel on either side of the roadway. It uses the road as a bit of a fuel break, and then where we have access and right of way on either side of the road, pulling some of that vegetation back, removing hazardous vegetation, and trimming up the remaining vegetation. So that there's good clearance and the best fire break that we can offer. So if you haven't had a chance to drive down there, take a look. The crew is off this week, but they'll be back a bit next week, and they'll be moving over to Grizzly Peak Boulevard here probably in mid-April. So EMBER, the long and short of this is that fire finds the weakest link. Wind-driven EMBER storms are basically searching for any vulnerability in your landscape or home, and homes can either be a target or a source. So your home can either be on the receiving end of embers, or if your home is ill prepared, it becomes the source of embers for the rest of the community. And hardened homes act as an internal fuel break from which firefighters can anchor and defend the community. And this video is on repeat, and it's on repeat for a reason. And I think that's because, or it is because a lot of times we see wildfire approaching a neighborhood, and then 2 or 3 days later, we see the devastation. And the common thought is, oh, wildfire must have swept through this community and just eaten up all these homes. And the reality from the ground is that that's not what happens. You have ember storms that come in front of a fire, and they start initial spot fires. And where those spot fires are adjacent to structures, they spread up into the structure, and a home here goes, and then a home over here goes. And then over the course of a couple of days, you lose the community. But it's not from fires sweeping through a neighborhood. It's generally from initial spot fires that then spark additional fires. And that's really where what we're trying to combat. There's dozens of ways for fire to spread through communities. We're looking here, obviously, at a section of Grizzly Peak, adjacent to Lake Anza. And if we only do some of the work, we don't get some of the benefit. Because fire is opportunistic, because any given ember that finds a receptive fuel bed becomes a structure fire if it's adjacent to a home. This isn't about stopping some of the embers, it's about stopping all of them. And there's 2 parts to that. There's the firefighting that you all do by preparing your homes, by preparing the vegetation around your homes, and then there's the firefighting that we do. If you leave it just to us and there isn't any preparation, we can't move at the speed of a wildfire. If we leave it just to you and we don't show up, we're never going to stop 100% of the embers. You can't do this alone. And so this really is a team effort. What we're looking for here is an opportunity to put resources towards our front lines. And you are our front lines here. You are the community that's adjacent to the wildland. And it makes a lot of sense for us to be investing our time, our energy, our resources in that community so that that community is the best prepared community in this city to face wildfire. As we find traction with this community east of Grizzly Peak Boulevard, as we partner on projects together, as we find that contiguous neighborhood of defensible homes, we can start to shift. We can start to look at other parts of the hills. We can start to work our way down to take bites of other parts of our greater hills community to do the same there. But we need to start in that front line. We need to make sure that you are prepared. We need to make sure that we've given you the resources to do that. The lower slide here is exactly why. The work that we do with you in this community potentially saves the rest of the downwind, downstream community. So those homes further down the hill, they owe their survival to the work that we do in this section between Grizzly Peak Boulevard and Wildcat Canyon Road. This slide we talked about on February 11th, and I kind of glossed over it because we were moving a bit quickly, but I think it's a really cool slide. For those of you that aren't familiar, this is the Miracle Home in Lahaina. It's been called the Miracle Home because why did it survive and nothing else did? And the story there is really interesting. But before I tell you that story, I'll briefly show you this graph here on the left. And this is from the Camp Fire, which is the fire that blew through Paradise. And after the fire, as they've done now in LA, researchers come down and they forensically look at why homes burned and what were the contributing factors. This graph is just the best representation that we found from maybe 24 reports that we've sifted through. But all the reports say the same thing. And that's if you don't have compliant defensible space around the home, that's that first blue square. If you have a combustible or otherwise not fire-rated roof, in this case wood, that's that second blue square. And if you don't have screens on your vents, that's that third blue square. Those are the three largest contributing factors to whether your home survives an urban conflagration or does not. So the story behind this miracle home is pretty cool. The owners bought it 2 years before the Lahaina fire. It's more than 100 years old. It needed a bunch of work. And they did a bunch of work, but the first two things they did is they pulled out all vegetation from within 5 feet of the home, and they replaced the roof with a metal roof. And that home is still standing. They knocked out two of the three things. I don't know if they did the ember resistant vents, but they did two of the three top things. And there is a reason that home is still there. The other reason is that my guess is the fire department came through and they're looking for an opportunity. There is one fire engine for every 6 homes that are burning. And they are looking for the place where they can make a stand and make the biggest difference for that community. So they're looking for the home where their efforts are going to pay off, but they're also looking for the home where their efforts are going to pay off for the greater community. If we put our time and effort into this home, will the homes downwind from it survive? And as I mentioned back on the 11th, the only bummer here is that everything west of this home is the Pacific Ocean. But also, as we talked about, what was really interesting is about a mile north of this miracle home, something else happened. And what you're looking at here is an FSRI post-incident analysis map that showed how the fire spread from the eastern part of the city down through the city and then north and south. And it looks a little bit like a river flowing through. And then you'll notice that there's one section there where that river kind of eddies, where the fire stops and burns around. That's the really interesting thing here. That is called Coahoma Village. It was built in 2017 to modern fire code standards, and with that was defensible space and home hardening. The fire got to that that southern flank of Coahoma Village, and it stopped. There are over 200 homes in that village. 5 of them burned. So, number one, that's huge for that community. That community survived today in no small part because of the work that they did, both in construction, but also in defensible space. But equally important is the role that Coahoma Village almost played in providing additional protection to everywhere north of that. You'll notice that the fire had to find a pathway around to the east before it could get into the northern part of Lahaina. Had Coahoma Village extended even further east, my question is whether northern Lahaina would have burned. And I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you that this map is fairly revealing in the impact that Coahoma Village had for its own survival, let alone the rest of the community. There it is again, at a closer scale. Another thing we talked about that I think is also really interesting is this is outside of Valparaiso, Chile. And they had a fire, I want to say back in 2019. And this community is up in the hills outside of Valparaiso. And Valparaiso and Chile in general does not have the same firefighting capabilities that California or the United States have. So when the fire reached the edge of this community, there were no firefighters. The fire burned around this community and continued, and not a single home was lost. And the researchers that went down there and looked at that attributed it to one simple fact, and that's that it was a tight-knit, tightly spaced community with very little structure separation distance, where the homeowners and residents had to work together to create defensible space as a community and create contiguous homes side by side, each of which was ember resistant, each of which lacked receptive fuel beds to start fires throughout the whole community. As I said on the 11th, this community fought this fire years before the fire ever got there, and they won. Something that I also think is really important, and I think nobody up here is a stranger to the fact that insurance is challenging right now. And one of the things that I noticed last year as we were going through inspections is that we'd go through inspections and we would inspect to the fire code, and people would meet the expectation of the fire code, and then they would be cited for non-renewal with their insurance agencies. And they'd say, wait a minute, we just got a clean bill of health from the fire department. Why are we not being renewed? And the reason for that is that the fire code is not kept up with industry standards. The fire code does not currently cite zone 0, and the industry standard does. When you look at the California Department of Insurance Safer from Wildfires Act, when you look at the IBHS standards, anyone that's tried to have their home certified as an IBHS fire safe home, or excuse me, wildfire prepared home, knows that zone 0 is a very clear and very necessary part of that process. And so when we look at the discrepancy there, it's sending folks a confusing message, which is that you can be okay in the fire code and then you don't get insured. And so our other main goal here is to align our fire code with industry best practices, with the science, with the research, with, I said, the post-incident analysis, as insurance agencies have already done. And so that instead of being able to provide maybe one home that happens to go the extra mile to do some of this work, we can demonstrate a community with contiguous homes side by side. Any one home is okay. That's a good step forward, but that home is still susceptible to the homes to the left and right of it. And if those homes are not prepared and they ignite, defensible space does not save your home from the radiant heat of an adjacent structure fire. And so what we are really trying to accomplish here with EMBER and with this fire zone is a contiguous block of homes so that each one of them together functions to protect the one to the right and to the left. I believe, I got one more, I believe. Let's see. Two more. So the meat and potatoes of this. A lot of great flowery language, a lot of research, a lot of pictures. Here's what it means for residents. So for folks in the new fire zone, if this does get passed by City Council, when that is the area between Grizzly Peak and Wildcat Canyon Road, which I will point out, the distance between Grizzly Peak and Wildcat Canyon Road is on average the same distance from one side of Coahoma Village to the other. So it's the same geographic space as that area I showed you that almost, I would say, stopped the line of fire. In that area, within the first 5 feet of the home, there would be no vegetation allowed, no combustibles allowed, and that includes wooden fences. So for those of you with wooden fences that abut your home, the first 5 feet of that fence would either need to be removed or replaced with a non-combustible version. They go anywhere from $150 or so for something down at Home Depot to infinitely expensive. The only things that would be permitted in those first 5 feet are things that could be easily moved on high fire danger days. So up to 10 plants in non-combustible pots that could be moved by the person who lives there. And no climbing vines on the structure. This is a painful one. The wisteria, the bougainvillea, the stuff that is beautiful on homes is also a significant hazard for that home in the event of a wildfire. Zone 0 is the big one, but it's also important to note that between 5 and 30 feet of the home, you would not be allowed to have vegetation that provides a contiguous pathway to the home. So a lot of times that looks like privacy hedges, and plant groupings would be limited to groups of 3, and the diameter of a plant would need to be less than 10 feet. Again, all of this is based on evidence and research done by IBHS, by NIST Technical Note 2205, a bunch of other acronyms that I could go through, but I'll show you a report here in just a minute. And all of it is based on what gives homes a fighting chance in an urban conflagration to not be a target for embers. One of the things that I'll bring up here is that the current fire code provides a lot of ambiguity. It says an inspector can show up. They can look at your home. They can say, well, you've got these components to your home. You've got this kind of vegetation. I guess we could allow this. We probably shouldn't allow this. And so one thing that we notice is that sometimes homeowners on one side of the street have been told one thing, and the homeowners on the other side of the street find out that plants that were allowed in their neighbor's property are not allowed on their properties based on the threat perceived by the inspecting official. We'd also like to get rid of that. We'd like to make it very clean so that it isn't up to the interpretation of a local inspector, but really just follows the evidence and the science. The evidence and the science. And this is the last slide that I'll show you before we open it up for questions. For those of you that don't want to take my word for it, and I highly suggest that you don't, this is all coming from other research. A good place to start is the IBHS research arm. This paper, Wildland Fire, Embers, and Flames, Home Mitigations That Matter, is a great opener for understanding a lot of the science behind this. It's a great primer. You can go from here into dozens of papers from Canada, from Australia, from Northern and Southern California, post-incident analysis, research going back to the late 80s, early 90s, all of which builds on create the code. Elemental.
Go ahead, Colin. We lost you briefly. Go ahead.
Cool. Elemental, Reimagine Wildfire is a great film that covers a lot of the science as well. Watch for an hour and a half without having to read too much stuff. So those are two good places to start. That is the end of what I have for you. I'm sure there are some questions, and I really appreciate everybody's time tonight and patience. So, Councilmember Blackaby, I'm here for you.
All right, thank you, Colin, and thanks for that. I know this is a lot of information in a short time, and it's a lot of detailed information. But thanks for making it as approachable and understandable and digestible for all of us as possible. As Colin mentioned, we like to move to about the next 30 minutes Q&A. So if you do have a question, now's your time. Just raise your hand. Click the raise hand button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We'll get you in the queue. My legislative aide, Lori McWhorter, will call on people one by one. Just unmute yourself, ask your question, and then mute yourself, and then Colin and myself can take a crack at answering. Before we do, I want to start really quickly with one question that I've heard a lot, and it's something I'm thinking a lot about and working hard on with our team, which is a question of finances and funding. Colin mentioned that, to really get the level of protection we need to protect all of us and all of our homes in these neighborhoods, as well as the rest of the city, we need to be getting 30, 40, 50, if not 80% participation to really get that kind of protection. And I know it's a lot to ask, and we need to reduce as many barriers as we can. One of the barriers is a financial one. So for sure, as we, assuming that the city council does pass EMBER, less the form that we've seen it, the financing piece is the part that I'm going to spend, again, the balance of the year. We've got to get that right to make sure that we can provide the support we need to get to that kind of level of participation. So just let folks know, one of the things we've already got is we've got $1 million CAL FIRE grant for vegetation management, especially for homeowners that need that kind of financial assistance, which we're going to be dedicating almost exclusively to sort of this work in Zone 4 in these like high targeted kind of wildfire areas. So we already have some grant money set aside. If folks remember, California passed Prop 4, statewide ballot measure, last fall. We are pushing and working with our state senator, former mayor Jesse Arreguín, as well as Assemblymember Buffy Wicks, to kind of get as much clarity around and hopefully access to some of that funding to do this work. I'll say that Assemblymember Wicks was just with Chief Sprague and Assistant Chief Arnold and myself. We did a tour starting in Park Hills and kind of driving along Grizzly Peak to show her the size of this Zone 4 and the kind of to do, just to make sure that she knows what we're doing and can push and advocate for the kind of funding we need to do this work. I'll say that Berkeley Fire Department currently offers free wire mesh that we're making available. They're making available to cover vents on homes. There's some kind of very quick wins, and they're trying to make it easy for us to sort of do those things. As we talked about before, there's a kind of a volunteer corps or several volunteer corps coming together. The mayor is really interested in kind of creating this sort of Berkeley volunteer corps. We're talking a lot about that and kind of engaging people who want to help. The Berkeley Fire Safe Council is also, again, volunteered to help organize groups to help people do this work. Councilmember Wengraf last year already put in place a transfer tax credit to help people at the time of sale, like we do with seismic retrofit, do some finance home hardening and give people incentive to do that work at the time of sale. And I'll say, look, we're not stopping there. I think there's other states have passed income tax credits like the state of Colorado has to finance this kind of work. We're trying to figure out low interest loan programs that could work. So, and then the last really big piece of the financing certainly is the home insurance part. This is also something that we're pushing the state on. If we commit as a huge part of this neighborhood in the Berkeley Hills that we are meeting those IBHS insurance industry standards, the insurance industry should be covering us or giving us some sort of discount on rates. Like there should be a closed loop to kind of close the deal and say, like, we've done our part, we've done this preventative work. Let's make sure that the insurance piece is also solved. So again, that's another part of that. So just by way of saying, I agree that the financing and funding is an important part. And so we're not stopping with EMBER and the fire code. We also know that implementation is important, financing is important, workshops to help neighborhoods understand how to do the work is important, educating all of the landscape architects of like, how to comply with the new regulations, that's important. So this implementation part is a big piece, and we're already starting to think about it. So that's one question. Colin, I know we got a few also that we already received by email, some questions, and maybe you just kind of want to take a few of those and then we'll go to the live Q&A.
Sure. Thanks. Let me see if I can pull them.
And one of them, I think, yeah.
I
Right.
actually just tried to pull them up and I lost them, but I think I've got a good number of them
Yeah.
just from looking at them earlier. So please speak up, Lori, if I miss any of these. I think one of the early questions was, why Grizzly Peak and what is it that we hope to gain? And the reason is, as I mentioned in the presentation, it is the front line. It is the place where we are going to be impacted the first. It is the area where our resources are best used to stopping a wildfire throughout the whole city. So I'm actually currently in a home that's just outside of the Grizzly Peak area. We're staying with family, and I'm bummed that this house is not in that zone because I want to see that zone expand as quickly as possible. Because yes, the work that we do in that zone provides protection for the rest of the city, but it is also the number one thing that we can do to provide protection to that zone itself. It relates to another question that your office got about why contiguous homes matter. I mentioned this very briefly, but it's worth repeating. A home is susceptible to wildfire only within a certain distance of wildland. Once you get more than about a half a mile from wildland, those embers generally aren't flying from the wildland. They're flying from other homes. And the research behind why a home survives a wildland fire is different from the research as to why a home survives a fire from a home that is burning adjacent to it. Most of the fuel that is in our hills is in the form of the structures that we live in. And so the best thing that we can do is prevent those structures from burning, because if we stop one structure from burning, the adjacent home won't ignite from radiant heat. Doesn't matter what you do with defensible space. It doesn't matter what you do with any other home hardening or anything else in your home. If the home next to yours is burning, there's a decent chance with the structure separation distance that we have in Berkeley that your home will burn too. And that's where we come in. And I think that's the value of, if we can stop the spontaneous ignition from embers from other homes, then the fire department can jump home to home, put those out before they affect the adjacent homes. And that's where we really come into play. I am blanking on the other questions right now. I will also find them too, unless you've got them.
Yeah. One question is whether we would provide a list of companies to do this kind of work.
Great question. We don't currently have a list. As a general rule, the city doesn't necessarily provide specific private parties that do work. One thing that Councilmember Blackaby mentioned and that we're also really invested in, though, is providing education to landscape architects, to landscapers in the region to make sure they are very clear on what the work is. Another thing that we have every intention of doing is, if this does pass, to make sure that every household in this area has a U.S. mail piece of paper that they can hand to whoever does their yard work. And if that's you, good on you. Where they have a list of what needs to be done to make sure that it's compliant, so that there's no gray area. And we're also looking for ways to provide education and options and creative solutions to this, so that it's not just about removal, but it's also about maintaining the character of your Berkeley home, which I know is a really cool part of these hills. that we want to maintain.
Great. Last one, and then we'll go to some others, is would it be possible for the department to let us know when someone's coming to inspect, or it would be possible to give permission to look around, especially in the backyard, even if no one is home? So just that inspection process.
Yeah, great question. With the volume of inspections that we do, it's very hard to schedule individual inspections. We just never get to them. And some folks are really interested in spending some time with us, and I don't want to cut them short because we're scheduled to be somewhere else. So we found it to be very difficult to try to individually schedule those inspections. However, I hear you loud and clear on access to properties. One thing that we are currently beta testing, some of our residents here off of Wildcat Canyon Road have probably gotten the email. We're testing a right of entry approval where you can sign up, let us know that you're giving us access to the property if you're not home. We'll still come out, we'll knock on your door. If somebody's home, we'll walk the property with you. But if nobody knocks on the door and you have signed that, you've given us permission to do that 360 tour of the outside of your home. So keep an eye out for that. I was hoping it was going to be out this week. We had a bit of a glitch in the rollout, so hopefully next week you'll see it.
Great. And then one I'll take that I see in the chat, and then Lori will come to you, is people asking about housing in the hills, housing density in the hills. I'll say one of the topics of conversation with Assemblymember Wicks, as Chief Sprague was driving us in the mobile the other day, was a personal appeal from the chief, like, just check out these neighborhoods. We can't add more density, right, in the hills. It's a safety issue. It's already a safety issue with the current number of people that live up here with respect to evacuation. So with people asking about density, there is this missing, the middle housing is coming back to council. There will be no additional middle housing density in the fire zone. And again, and the chief is lobbying Assemblymember Wicks that we should extend that. Now that we have sort of, again, I support more housing. We need more affordable housing in Berkeley, no question about that. But we also need to do it in a way that's safe, and adding more density in the hills is not safe, and it's not going to happen. So I just want people to know that that is a part of this. We're not adding more housing at the same time that we're asking people to do this kind of work. Lori, I'll kick it to you to start kind of going through the live Q&A if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Okay, first question comes from Jacqueline Evans. Please unmute yourself.
Jacqueline, if you unmute, we can hear you. Otherwise, we can come back.
No, she's there. Go ahead.
Okay, great.
You just muted yourself again. All right, well, let's...
Lori, I do see a question from her in the chat if you'd like me to tackle that.
Do it, yeah.
She asked what's needed to get a fire hydrant on Alta Road. We are very familiar with this challenge, or a personal fire hydrant. There are a number of streets in Berkeley where there's not fire hydrants on those actual roads. One of our normal training procedures is to work with multiple companies to make sure that we can supply that. So even if you don't have a fire hydrant on your road or near your property,
yeah,
you don't have to worry. We've got the ability to lay just as much water up that road. It's something that you could always call EBMUD about and let them know in case they have a plan to install that within the district. As for personal hydrants, I'm not sure that that's something that's an option. I've never been asked that. And I don't know about personal fire hydrant use. The water is fairly regulated, so that kind of unregulated supply on your property might be difficult.
Can you talk real quickly just on that about, and the chief has mentioned this to me before too, about sort of the pumps that you guys have in Lake Anza, and sort of just, you've already done also some other work. We're not just relying on EBMUD. I mean, that is a part of this obviously, but you guys have some other options too, right?
Yeah, and I think, you know, when we're talking about the kind of incident or kind of event that we're talking about, which is a widespread large conflagration, we are probably not tying into hydrants anyway. We're filling engines, moving on to homes, making sure that those homes are secured, refilling engines. So we're kind of jumping around the neighborhood. There's also air attack, there's air tankers, there's a coordinated effort with CAL FIRE. We have the ability in Berkeley to pump from one fire zone to another. So Councilmember Blackaby showed you that graphic earlier about different zones in Berkeley and how water gets up to them. Well, there's 9 different zones in Berkeley, and if one of them is drawn down based on us overusing that zone. In Berkeley, we can actually put a fire engine at one of those hydrants and pump more water up into that zone. And then also through Measure Q, we have a above ground water system that can pump water through two 12-inch mains from the bay or from Lake Anza a couple of miles to create portable hydrants and a portable water supply for a large incident.
Great, thanks. Go ahead,
Next,
Lori, next one.
next, Wendy Pulling.
Here we go.
Hi.
I thank you. Hi. Thank you so much for doing this. And I fully support the proposal, as hard as it's going to be for all of us. I think I joined late, so you may have already addressed this, but I had seen some chatter about maybe mature native trees within the 5-foot zone would be allowed. But I'm guessing that the answer is no, everything has to go. Is that correct?
Wendy, I'm really glad you asked that question. And it's beyond me why I haven't started addressing this more in the presentation. No, you're incorrect. You will be able to, mature trees are allowed within that first 5 feet. And by mature trees in the fire code, we define that as greater than 15 feet. And the reason for that is twofold. One, a mature tree, you can actually clean up the growth beneath it so that there's no ladder fuels. The canopy of a tree tends to provide or tends to cause or create very little threat for a home. It's really about the vegetation at the base of that tree spreading up into the tree. The real challenge that you have if you have trees close to your home is making sure that that ground around the tree stays clean. And making sure, especially on those high fire days, that you're raking up any dead leaves that hit the ground. But mature trees would be allowed to remain inside those 5 feet.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Karen Weinstein. Please unmute.
Okay, hi.
Hi, Karen.
Hi, good to see you and thank you very much for this. I think I heard you say that the city provides a list of companies that do some of the work. And I'm just wondering if it is at all possible to have, I don't know what it would be, like a consultant that looks at our whole neighborhood and says, in order to be, good, these are the things in each of these houses that have to be done, rather than each of us doing it separately.
And that's a great idea. You did mishear me. We don't have a list of companies that'll do the work specifically. However, yeah, great idea. I think working on having a resource available to come out to either a targeted neighborhood, a block, a firewise community, even an individual property, to be able to give you really concrete advice about both meeting the fire code and also having a home that's unique and still beautiful and maintaining a lot of the character that you have in your home. That's a really good idea, and we will take that back and try to turn that into action. Thank you.
And I'll
Great.
say too, just in terms of this implementation, like, look, the work is not going to be done. Like, we're not going to say pass EMBER and like, okay, good luck. It's like workshops, trainings. I mean, the chief has already talked about maybe scheduling time where we've got personnel in the neighborhood to do some walkthroughs. Like, there's a lot that we know to get the kind of compliance that we need. This is not just hey, here, good luck to you. Here's what you need to do. Like, we need to help make it possible. And so there's a lot to come, I think, on the education, information, workshops, trainings to make this doable. And I think your idea of some of this neighborhood wide makes sense. I think it's probably some economies of scale too. For example, if you find a vendor to at a whole neighborhood at a time, as opposed to scheduling things in a piecemeal fashion. So I'm super interested in pursuing those sorts of ideas.
Margot Smith.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm worried about evacuation routes and, whether you're working with Public Works Department in Berkeley to make sure that the evacuation routes are clear, from impediments like on Hopkins Street, it would have been the bicycle paths, but there are other impediments that need to be made sure that fire engines and the equipment can get through. Are you working on evacuation routes?
Let me start with one and then Colin. So let me say one thing that we did that we are doing next to EMBER is this, we're calling the Safe Passages program, which is more red curbs, more no parkings, working with the fire department and public works to identify those pinch points so that we mark those, and then also doing enforcement, especially in fire weather, to make sure that we keep those areas as clear as possible. We may need to do more, which is in certain blocks saying there's no parking on this side of the street, it's only on this side of the street. But we're starting with more of that piece for ingress and egress. Colin, I'll kick it back to you for the rest of the evacuation, but at least wanted to start with that point.
Yeah, and I cut out there for a minute and I'm back. So if I missed this question, please follow up. But yeah, we absolutely are looking at ways to evacuate the hills more effectively. The evacuation time study was a big part of that, and we're currently diving into that with the contractor to make sure that we've got the best information that we can have. So for instance, where can we focus resources when we do need to evacuate so that we can clear up pinch points coming out of the hills to get traffic moving. But one thing that seems to be clear again and again is that it is going to take a while to remove a large number of people from the Berkeley Hills. We are going to continue to find ways to do that as efficiently as possible. We're going to make sure we throw everything we can at that if that's what we need to do. But it's also a great reminder, as our Director of Office of Emergency Services said on February 11th, these wildfire events are predictable when you look at the weather. So these extreme weather days are predictable indicators of fire weather, where if a fire starts, it will move at a speed that we cannot evacuate the hills. So yes, absolutely. There's a lot of reasons that we might need to get people out of the hills, and we need to make sure that we're looking at safe passages along with a number of other things. But on those extreme fire weather days, when you see that advisory that you should leave the hills if you're able, we strongly encourage you to heed that so that you don't become victim to some of those impediments.
And to Colin's point, just on that, I mean, because like even if perfect access to every street, every route in the hills, we could not, with the speed that the wildfire moves, we can't get everyone out if no one pre-evacuated. So pre-evacuation is important, and then we'll go from there as well to make it as easy for everyone else to get out.
Next is William Pottinger.
Hi, can you hear me, Brent and Colin?
Yes.
Hi.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot very much for the presentation. And I'm definitely an EMBER supporter. And I have a question that's not EMBER. It's related to a topic we've already covered, but it comes up regularly enough that I'd love to hear your thoughts. It's about the smaller Summit Reservoir capacity that resulted from the recent rebuild. Is Berkeley Fire Department satisfied with its current 3 million gallon capacity? I think it goes up to $6 million when it's coupled with another nearby reservoir. But it'd be nice to sort of put this issue to rest because it does come up from time to time.
Yeah, I ended up asking EBMUD about this. We ran into them at a presentation a couple of weeks ago, and I asked their director specifically about their reservoir. And the rebuild took an old open reservoir that basically just had water exposed to the air, and then rebuilt it in a contained reservoir. I am not concerned about the gallon capacity that we have in the hills for these types of events because of the networking that we have, because of the regional partnerships, because of the air attack resources that we have. Our day-to-day capacity meets what our expectations are for East Bay Mud. I'm also cognizant of the fact that they every day have to deliver clean, safe drinking water, and the more gallonage you keep up there for a 10-year event, the more work it takes to make sure that stays sanitary for drinking. And I am not a water expert when it comes to that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of faith that I have in their ability to provide that. And because of the partnership that we have, and because of the ability to pump between zones, it is not something that we are really concerned about right now in terms of the challenges that we have in front of us.
And I'll say the other piece of this too, Bill, is there's also the storage tank near Woodhaven. We've also been kind of asking. I think that's also been sort of empty for some period of time. So again, I think we're looking at all this. We're asking all this. They do fill up and add water in fire weather, and like I mentioned, the generators. So they do have a strategy for fire weather and making more water available, but we'll push them on making sure they're doing as much as possible in all these ways.
And another part of that conversation, council member, what we followed up with was developing a partnership so that we have these extreme fire weather days to make sure that we touch base with them, so that a couple days ahead of that event, we are pumping additional capacity if that's something that's an option, just so we're more prepared, even if we're not keeping it up there on a regular basis.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill.
Hai-Chen Wang.
Hello.
Please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hello, Councilmember Blackaby and Mr. Arnold. Thank you very much for your service. This is a complicated and important issue. So I have a suggestion and then I have a question. So my suggestion is that it would be a good idea to come up with a Google Doc or some sort of public-facing document that can be updated daily, at least for the next few weeks until the legislation is passed. I think the information is overwhelming, so it takes a lot of time to process and digest. And I'm sure like people were going to come up with new questions over the course of the next few days. That is a suggestion. So the question is that it just feels to me that we're paying a great deal of attention to the fire risk that's coming from the east, from the Tilden Park. And I understand the justification because like in the Diablo wind event, of course, the wind comes from northeast. So, you're implementing this zone 4. So I think earlier in the presentation, Mr. Arnold, you said something to the effect that like basically we're doing a service, like the zone 4 residents is doing a service for the rest of the community down the hill. So I'm just wondering, like, from your expertise, like, what is the fire risk? Let's say, hypothetically, if fire breaks out somewhere down the hill, and of course, a natural pattern for the fire to spread would be going up the hill, right? So, like, are we protected or not? If we're not really implementing zone 4 for the lower parts of the Berkeley Hills. So that's my question. Thank you.
Great question. Yeah, so the predominant risk is to our east because that's where the wildland is. That's going to remain wildland regardless of what we do with the vegetation there. So you can clean up the understory, you can create fuel breaks, you can replant it with something else. But this is a fire-dependent landscape. And while all of those are important factors that play in an overall prevention strategy, it remains true that fire has visited these hills at regular intervals since long before anybody settled here. So that is a reality that we need to be okay with, we need to be familiar with, and we need to address head on. And so the main focus of this approach, rather than trying to change the environment around us, is to adapt ourselves to be able to live safely in that environment. And that's where this Zone 0 comes from. You are absolutely correct that there is still risk to the remaining city. Some embers will blow over this zone. Some homes will ignite in this zone before we can get to them, and those homes will become sources of additional embers. There are other challenges elsewhere in the city, but we also know that embers decay over time as they fly through the air. Some extinguish, some fall. Once you get more than about a half mile from the wildfire or from the source, most of those embers decay to the point where they can't start additional fires. Some will continue, some will land elsewhere in this community, and that's why we have thousands upon thousands of firefighters in the Bay Area that are ready with a very robust mutual aid system to show up within 20, 30 minutes. They're knocking at the door. That's why we have a very robust air attack system with CAL FIRE helicopters tankers, there is a very strong response that we can bring to bear, but we have to give that response time to get into the city and to get to work. And we do that by putting that work into the front line so that that community is as protected as they possibly can be while they wait for what we hope and we expect and we train for to be a very short period of time before they have that backup.
I'll say I think the Google Doc, by the way, is a great idea. We'll compile an FAQ and just make that public. And the last thing I'll say is, you know, we are focusing on this zone 4 to start because it's important to start and get solid participation within that group to build. So do we make that neighborhood super resilient? It's good for that it's good, not just for the rest of the city, it's good for this neighborhood to have high compliance. And so we need to focus on that, but it's not going to be the end. And so then I think we'll be moving down the hill and adding more to that territory to build as big as a resilient part of our community as possible. So I wouldn't focus on these being the permanent ends of these lines. This is the starting point. We know we need to go farther down the hill to kind of build a broader kind of resilient barrier here. So by the way, and we got a few more questions. So I think, Colin, if you don't mind, we'll go to about 7:45. Thank you.
Alec Derek Abrams.
Am I audible?
You are.
Okay, great, thank you. Assuming that the EMBER program will be adopted and will start and proceed successfully, what plans are there for reporting the results to particularly the communities in terms of some kind of cadence other than a before and after cadence, or more often than annually, to give some kind of impetus to a sense of progress, a sense of legitimate progress on the part of the participants here, especially the Grizzly Peak Mitigation Zone people. Perhaps there's, especially since Councilperson Blackaby plays a role in Firewise in his neighborhood, perhaps Firewise groups would also be interested in knowing what their status and how it is changing over kind of the quarterly cadence of time.
Yeah.
And others around those Firewise
groups. Let me start real quick and then Colin. So I'm glad you brought up Firewise because I actually see that this Firewise network that we're building is like a huge part of this. Like getting like buy-in neighborhood by neighborhood and group by group with like local in the neighborhood leaders who are standing up and saying we need to do this and like bringing people along. Like that's so crucial. So it's not just the city or the fire department or the state. It's also the neighborhood saying we're in this together. We're going to do this. So I think the Firewise communities are great. They're already doing self-organized, are meeting, the leaders of each group are meeting to coordinate. We're meeting with the fire department to make sure that these leaders are also connected with fire. So like, I totally, like this network of Firewise community is really important. And I like your idea of reporting progress on not just an annual basis, but a more frequent basis, because I think that's the, keeping up with the Joneses kind of approach, right? A little of the friendly kind of rivalry and neighborhood, competition that we need. I think we're going to lean on all of those pieces to move the needle. And anything we can do to get to 30% to 50% to 70% participation. And Colin, I don't know if you have any thoughts in that regard, but I think this is a great idea.
Yeah, and we're actually up to 15 Firewise communities since I think we last reported. So it's they're growing. We also had our first quarterly Firewise leadership meeting, which created the beginnings of what I hope will be to exactly this question, an opportunity to get together with those community leaders and establish what we can do to help give them a sense of the progress in their own neighborhoods. There's also a monthly dashboard that we release to the Disaster and Fire Safety Commission that looks at the number of inspections, the number of violations, the number of resolved violations. We want to be sensitive to make sure that we're not giving out personal data or individually calling out specific people, but I think that's also a great platform that we can refine, especially with this Zone Zero EMBER initiative. To really target some of those neighborhoods and specifically call it out in that monthly report. So that's a great idea.
Claire Broom.
Hi, thanks so much for the information. And this, I'm trying to understand the letter we got January 16th, which appears to focus mostly on vegetation management on key roadways. But also, Councilmember Blackaby, you were sort of saying you're starting with the Grizzly Peak Wildcat Canyon area with the kind of zone 0 approach. When you say moving down the hill, are you talking about the main roadways, or you're talking about extending the zone 0 down through the neighborhoods?
I'm talking primarily about extending the zone 0 down through the neighborhoods, because if you look at the maps, and we don't have them up here in terms of the CAL FIRE map and also what the city of Berkeley's map is, our fire hazard zone extends well down past Euclid, if not down towards Spruce, the way that the fire department looks at this. So, and some of the restrictions will not be quite as the same the farther you get down the hill. But the point is, we're going to really get compliance and participation in sort of group by group, because we need those network effects, like those neighborhood effects, to make it really effective. I think Colin could attest that, in the past, the inspection works is great and participation is good, but we don't need a patchwork quilt of participation. We need, like a solid wall of participation in those neighborhoods, which is why we're kind of going this approach. So it will kind of continue neighborhood by neighborhood. Colin, you can take it.
Yeah, you're spot on. I'd also add, Claire, that the letter you're referencing is the Grizzly Peak project.
Yeah.
Apologies for the multiple uses of the name Grizzly Peak. That project was named years ago, but the other way I look at it is we are continually throwing resources at the same location. We just have to come up with better, smarter names so that they don't all sound the same. But the Grizzly Peak project is an effort to look specifically at roadways and mitigate fuel and vegetative load along areas where we, as a city agency, have the right and ability and responsibility to do it. Zone 4, this new area between Grizzly Peak and Wildcat Canyon Road, that is the EMBER program. That is the first 5 feet of space around your home. So they're 2 different projects. But the takeaway is that we've got multiple grant funds coming to the same location as well. So help's on the way.
Great. I'm going to take a few written questions. Now we have about 5 minutes left. One is about the Wildcat Canyon project. It says, though there's been some effort along that road, it's still heavily wooded with lots of dead trees everywhere. Given all that we're being asked, why can't those regional agencies with land along there be held to the same standard?
So East Bay Regional Parks is the partner that we're talking about to the east. Some of that work has been done. Last week, they finished up another couple acres of understory cleanup. There is a lot more work to be done. There always will be in a wooded area like that. I know there's a series of grant funds that are hopefully on the way to do some of that work. We do have every intention of working with them to develop the same standard. And remember that one of the things that we're talking about is defensible space. And so defensible space goes out to 100 feet from a structure. Once you get beyond 100 feet, if you go back and you watch that Elemental movie that I pointed out earlier, you'll see that after 100 feet, the vegetative load has very little impact on the structure. So you will not see all of Tilton Park at some point looking like zone 0. You will just see that work as it comes up adjacent to specific structures. But to your point, yes, there's more work to do there. We're hopeful that those grant funds come through this summer, and we've been meeting with them regularly to figure out where they're going to allocate some of that. But you will see some of that work between Wildcat Canyon Road and one of the roads down there right by the merry-go-round. So they just did a few acres last week.
And I would say, look, and to me, like, part of this is we have to pursue multiple strategies here. Like, even if the park district did a perfect job at vegetation management, or as close to perfect as possible, there's still a decent chance that with the right winds at the right times, a fire would start and we would be at risk. And so I believe in it's almost like it's the multiple Swiss cheese defense, which is like you're not going to be perfect on any one of them, but if we can have the water where we need it, if we can have the park district doing everything they can, if we can have PG&E doing everything we can, if we have all of us doing everything we can, that gives us the best collective chance. And if we just focus on one piece of the strategy and say, let's just put all of our eggs in that basket, I don't think that's going to lead to success. So that's, again, that's, I think, the view that I have, and I think the chief has, and other folks on the council.
What about wood decks and walkways around our homes? Do they have to be removed for zone 0, or can they be treated with something that can make them EMBER resistant?
Wood decks are considered an extension of your home. So if they're currently built, they do not need to be removed or otherwise changed as a part of the building code. But the 5 feet goes out 5 feet beyond those decks as an extension of your home. Best practice would be to replace those decks with non-combustible materials with a Class A decking. That's not required under EMBER. That's not required under the initiative. If you were to go out and apply for a building permit that affected that deck, you would at that time be required to meet the building code. But otherwise, no, the decks remain under the code. The defensible space just goes out 5 feet beyond the deck. Walkways around your home. It's actually a great place where people have been creating 5 feet of defensible space and putting in stairs, putting in paths with pavers and using that as an opportunity to make their 5 feet of defensible space.
Let me tack on, there are a lot of questions in the chat too that are very tactical materials. Let me also, just because the city does have a great resource, the Fire Safe Berkeley website that does have a lot of like information on this for people who want to go deep, and there are some lists of like which plants in this area and that kind of thing. So I just the plug is berkeleyfiresafe.org. And again, we're going to do a lot of education information in the coming months on implementation. So even if we don't talk about it here, there are going to be lots of opportunities to do that. But I would just direct people also to berkeleyfiresafe.org for lots of information if you want to go down some of these paths.
Okay, great. Well, maybe I'll ask one more and then we can close it. I hope I can find it again. It was about roofs. I just lost it.
Oh yeah, roofing materials.
Yeah, is it something? Does it have to be metal? I lost it, but so let me ask a different one. Does 1/16 fire mesh inhibit too much airflow to vent attics? What material should be used to cover roof soffits?
The EMBER resistant mesh is not too small to limit ventilation between in attic spaces. It's specifically designed to stop embers from coming in, but still provide adequate ventilation. I'll take a stab at your roof material. It does not need to be a metal roof. We're looking for a Class A non-combustible roof at the time that you pull a permit to replace your roof. And in fact, if you do pull a permit to replace your roof in Berkeley right now, in general, you're putting in a Class A non-combustible roof. That's usually asphalt shingles in most properties. There's still slate out there, which is a very expensive alternative. There's also a lot of, there's a home up here in the hills, a couple homes that now have tiles that look very much like old wood shingles, but are in fact a composite that's fire safe. And while I have the mic, one other thing I will add to Councilmember Blackaby's recommendation for places to go. If you're looking for specifics as to what EMBER might look like on a property, I'd encourage you to look up the IBHS Wildfire Prepared Home designation. That's IBHS Wildfire Prepared Home. Talks a lot about materials, zone 0, what you can do in those locations, and some of the specifics that folks are asking about.
Great. Clara popping her head in the door is a good reminder that we're at the witching hour, 7:45. I promised I'd come down. It's almost story time in the house. So I just want to kind of wrap up, and I'll let Colin say a couple of things. By the way, I do love the idea of more questions, FAQ, and posting that. So we'll do some work on that, and we'll have kind of a running tally. I think that's a really great idea. And as people have other questions, we'll try and post more of these responses. again, it's not the end of this process. This is sort of the beginning of the process as we get into the education. So Colin, maybe a couple of closing words, and I can close this out.
Sure. First off, we've had a number of these meetings. I really appreciate the interaction, the involvement. People care, and I really, it's a wonderful community to be a part of for that. This feels like a big change, and for some folks, it will be. And change often feels very difficult, and feels insurmountable. I'm really excited. I'm new to this position somewhat. It's been a year now, but I'm really excited by what I see in this community and what I've seen in terms of our ability to produce. So I'm really looking forward to moving forward and to working. We will be working individually with everybody here. We want to make sure that folks know this now. And if this passes, our next step is to make sure we get out there to every single person and make sure everyone's clear on what needs to be done long before this becomes enforcement. So we are partners here. We are here to make sure your home is safe and secure. We're not here to drop the hammer. We can if we have to, but that's not the goal. And so I'm really excited to be a part of a community that's leading the way, and not just the state, but the country. This is not the first time Berkeley's been the first. It won't be the last, but it's a pretty cool one. So thank you for your time and your participation and your really great questions.
Great. And thank you. And Colin, thank you for taking the time to field all the hot potato questions and for walking us through EMBER. I just maybe start with where we started, which is like, this is a big challenge, but this is the reality we live in, right? And we live up here because it's beautiful. It's a wonderful community, but there are also some realities that we have to face. But this is a collective problem, but with collective action, I know that we can address it. And so I'm really, again, I know there's some heavy lifting to do, but I know and I'm confident that if we do it together with our homeowners and with all of our regional partners, we can rise to the challenge. So next steps, just briefly in the process, next Tuesday, March 24th, we've got a hearing, the Public Safety Committee that I chair will be hearing this, and I anticipate approve it to move it to the full council. The council would then consider this on the April 15th meeting for kind of the first vote, first consideration, and then potentially the final adoption would come on May 6th. But again, your feedback, your questions will just help us refine and fine tune what we're doing and how we're communicating it in the weeks ahead. So thanks again, Colin, for being here. Thanks to Lori and Hannah and my staff for being here. And thank you for all of you for joining us for the conversation. And we look forward to continuing it in the weeks ahead. Have a good night and thank you so much.